All right, hello everyone. My name is Dante Baker, and I'm here with Terry Bransky, and we're here to do some questions, just to get to know him and what he does. And so I'm excited to do this out here in Reston, in the nature of Reston.
Beautiful.
Yes. So one question to ask is, what is trauma?
Yeah, thank you so much for doing this, number one, and I look forward to our work together. So trauma for me is a spectrum, and we're all on it somewhere. And trauma can be the obvious stuff, such as assault or overt, what I call overt trauma. But more oftenly, it's the subtle stuff, what I call covert trauma, which is the attachment injuries during childhood, misattuned parenting. And it's not anybody's fault. It's just we live in a culture that's so stressed out. And that stress, we pass that to each other like a virus, both horizontally and vertically, from parents to children. And so things that we, with our adult minds, will often think are trivial or not traumatic, to kids are completely different. A lot of things are traumatic to kids that it's hard to even realize with an adult mind. So that trauma, it really lives inside of us, and it causes us to get stuck in the past in a lot of ways, and it causes, there are three things that I say: it's constriction, fragmentation, and disconnection that all happen within us. And that's what trauma is. And then looking at it that way, I think, is very different than we typically do. Like it's something to get rid of or to fight against. Whereas with this approach, it's just something that it's a natural outcome of certain circumstances in our life that we can work with rather than against.
I see. Okay, beautiful. Thank you for sharing that. Awesome. And then, so what is internal family system?
Yeah, internal family systems is by far the most fascinating to me and effective approach that I've found. So it's both a type of therapy and a tool for self-improvement that we use and it fundamentally looks at the mind in a very different way. So we tend to think of the mind in this culture as one thing. We say I and we say me as if we're referring to a single entity. But we also are aware on some level that we often have contradictory and divergent thoughts, feelings, and opinions on things at any given time. So if I'm struggling with a big decision, for example, I'll tend to waver back and forth, and I'll have completely opposing thoughts on the matter, moment to moment. Another example is when we say we're going to do one thing, and then we do another. And I'm not referring to when we're being dishonest. Well, we've all had the experience where we say one thing, we mean it when we say it, and then we do the opposite. And for a lot of us, this happens over and over again in certain areas of our life where we can see the pattern happening over and over. So, clearly there are conflicting processes at work in the mind when this occurs. So in IFS, we look at the mind as consisting of parts rather than being a single thing. And those parts are subpersonalities within us. They're more than just emotions. They really have their own ways of thinking about and viewing the world. And the other thing I highlight is these parts, they're completely normal. It's how the mind is. We all have them. They're not created as a result of trauma, but they are impacted by it. So our parts are the ones who carry our trauma, and our parts are the ones who get stuck in the past. And this is where the notion of inner child comes from, although in this approach we say inner children, because there's always more than one of them. And so in terms of trauma treatment, we form relationships with our parts, and again, we work with them rather than against them to heal.
Oh, beautiful. Awesome. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
And then I would say, what is authentic relating? How does that connect?
Yeah, so authentic relating, I discovered, there are a few people around here who do it, and I first experienced it at Interfusion a few years ago. I had no idea what it was going in, and it at least the way the person at Interfusion does it, it's, there's a big group of people, and you break up into pairs, and you have these very intimate conversations with each other, sometimes for a few minutes at a time, sometimes longer, and you really find yourself opening up to someone you've never met before, and I found it really, really powerful. So it really resonated with me in terms of, again, the IFS is all about forming inner relationships, and authentic relating is about outer relationships normally. And I just really felt good coming out of that session. So I've done it a bunch of times since, and again, there's people around here who host it. So that to me, it's all about relationship and connection, which I just find fascinating.
Yeah, beautiful. So the event that we're going to do is combining authentic self-relating and sound healing. And so what would people expect when they come to one of our sessions?
Yeah, so authentic self-relating is my term for applying IFS in a group setting to ourselves. So we get to know some of the parts of ourselves. I walk people through how to I guide people through how to find parts inside and form initial relationships with them. And we start to learn, we hear the stories of our parts. Like, so if parts of us are traumatized, and they're acting in certain ways that aren't helpful anymore, we get to start hearing why that is and how they're feeling and what they need. And another way of looking at it is as inner attachment work, because it really is about the us, the true self, the capital S self, relating and forming these connections with our parts. So at our session, I give an overview of this approach, and we get some of the concepts down, and some fundamentals out there, and then I guide people through some what we call IFS meditations, which it looks like a normal meditation, but we're actually being very active. We're actively getting to know our internal landscape and meeting some of the parts of ourselves. So that's kind of the intro to both IFS and relating to ourselves in a more authentic way.
Yeah, beautiful. And then I think at the second part, we'll do the sound meditation. So that will allow people to go deeper within, to go through what you would put people through. And what I'll be doing is the sound healing, the crystal bowls, the metal bowls, the flutes. So getting people into that transcendental meditative consciousness.
Love it.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
that should be good. And then another question I just thought of is, how did IMF, or the internal family systems, help you with whatever you were going through, what you were dealing with?
Yeah, when I discovered it, so I read a bunch about it. It just made so much sense in terms of this way of looking at the mind. And I tried it as a client first, because this has been a career change for me. I did IT for the longest time, of all things. And so my first experience with it was as a client. And that's where I saw, you read about something and it always looks good on paper. We see these things all the time. But just getting that experiential component for me was so powerful, to get to know myself in such a deeper way. Why I had certain tendencies, what things I like, things I don't, ways that I react to certain things. That, a lot of us, when we're reacting based on the past, we tend to overreact to things, and that's not just anger. That can be fear, that can be anxiety, sadness. Things trigger us in the present, and it can be very mysterious as to why that is. Whereas when we start seeing, it's parts of us who are actually reacting this way, and that's what we're experiencing. Number one, it turns on the self-compassion piece, because we're not trying to fight ourselves anymore, which what we normally, at least in this culture, are told to do, like use willpower or anything like that. So that's self-understanding for me and for the people I work with has been so critical. Really turns on the self-compassion, and you can't work with parts, you can't fight them. You're going to lose in that battle, because they're doing what they do for a reason. And so turning that around and looking inward in a compassionate way, again, for me, was so powerful. And that's what really showed me, wow, this approach really is that amazing.
Yeah, beautiful.
Yeah.
It sounds amazing, and it sounds like you have to really go inside and do a lot of beautiful work, and it's challenging work, but overall, at the end of it, you begin to connect with yourself, your true self.
Absolutely.
Would you say that?
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah.
And then, what would be some advice you would give parents, parents involved with having children, so they may not go through some of the traumas that we would go through at the time?
Yeah, such a big subject. And a lot of times, like if parents come and they want me to work with one of their kids, my usual answer is, okay, maybe, but I'd like to work with you first a little bit, because kids they're reacting to their environment, and it's not about blame. Like that, trauma passes on. We pass our trauma on. No one wants to do it. It's never intentional. It's just a law of the universe. Like, that's what happens. So the first thing is getting a handle on what we've been through in our past as parents, and how that's translating into our parenting in terms of our reactivity, both overt, like in terms of, reactivity can be like there's a high energy to it, like anger or rage, but it can also be there's a low energy, there's a numbing. A lot of times there's a dissociation. So as we turn inwards and get to know ourselves, we start to pretty quickly see, this is how this is impacting my parenting. Whereas in this culture, how many books are there about parenting skills that we're going to try and teach people? And that's all top down. It's trying to cover up what's already there in the unconscious. And so this stuff to me is more bottom up, where we look at the why behind it, and that's when the light bulbs start to go on. And I have a 6-year-old daughter. I certainly have found that and continue to find that. It's like, oh yeah, now it makes sense.
Yeah,
So
beautiful.
yeah.
Thank you for sharing that. And then I think my last question would be, when it comes to the Western way of looking at either psychological illnesses or even in our society, I think sometimes we look at people who are depressed or have anxiety. I hear a lot of people say like, I've had depression. I've had depression for years, or I am an anxious person, and they identify with that. And some or most people will take some sort of pharmaceutical drug. And so, what would be the difference between like that and your approach?
Yeah, so in this approach, in an approach, it's all coming from parts. So, and that's where once we separate from that, it's not so much I am depressed anymore. It might be a part of me is depressed, or a part of me has intense sadness, or maybe parts. But we get some separation from it, because yeah, there is a tendency to identify. Psychiatry revolves around diagnoses, which are merely descriptions of symptoms. It doesn't explain anything. It's just every diagnosis is just a description of this is what this person goes through when they have this quote unquote condition.
Yeah.
So when we get separation from it from a parts perspective, and again we ask why. So it's not about how to get rid of the symptom, as tempting as that may be, but it's about why is that symptom manifesting. And when we address the why, the symptom goes away.
Yeah.
And we don't have to drug it, into oblivion or try to cover it up with. I mean, there's all kinds of different ways we try to just kind of cover things up and not address them.
Right.
And it's not intentional. It's just how it's how a lot of the Western medicine works.
Right.
There's not. It's very rare to ask why and address it from a bottom up
Yeah.
kind of way. And that's true for both mental conditions and chronic physical conditions too. And I'm saying, we have this notion of mind-body separation that doesn't work for me. And a lot of times in this practice, we find that, people come in with, mental health challenges or reactivity and things like that, but they also find that their physical health conditions are tied into that directly. Because parts can cause somatic symptoms, and then that stuff starts to abate as well. So it's almost like a 180 view of in the West how we try and treat these types of things.
Yeah. Yeah. I think or at least I've seen how the cells will remember trauma, and how like the body will start to keep all that stuff in until you address it, until it comes up into the surface.
Yeah.
And so I can see how what you do is very beneficial for people who are struggling with physical illnesses.
Yeah, it's amazing. Yeah, every time I see it, yeah.
Beautiful. And then one follow-up question is, so how does your practice help couples? Like, a lot of people are having challenges in relationships, and I even tend to see online this gender war that happens so often. And I have found that when you're talking about relationships and couples connecting and going deeper, sometimes people will use different terms of like blaming other people, or start to just use different terms to like kind of make another person bad. Like, this person's a narcissist, or this person has emotional issues, or like the women have emotional issues, can't handle her emotions. And so instead of like using those terms, like how would you approach these really big topics of relationships and the quote unquote gender war?
Yeah, well, to start with, it's similar to parents and kids, where if a couple comes in, I want to see them individually for a while, because until some of that, a lot of times there's a very high reactivity going on, and if you put them together in a room and we try to do therapy, it actually can make things worse, because they're triggering each other. So in the first few sessions individually, we lay out all the part stuff, we get to know some of their parts, and that immediately kind of calms. Doesn't get rid of it, but it has a very calming impact on, like, once the parts feel heard and seen, which a lot of times they haven't been ever, they don't need to react that much. The reactivity is a lot of times their way of trying to get your attention, and we don't know that, so that's why all these things tend to get worse over time if they're unaddressed. So what we see with couples is that, I like to say parts trigger parts. So if a part of me is angry, it's going to trigger a part in you, and then it's back and forth, and it just escalates. Whereas when I'm in capital S self, which is IFS's term for our essence, our seat of consciousness, it has the opposite effect. It tends to trigger self. So trigger's not the right word at that point, right? Because it's a good thing. So these things attract each other. So as we get each member of the couple, again, familiar with self and more mindful of what their parts are doing, they start reinforcing each other in that way. And that's when the actual couples therapy, so to speak, can begin, because they're coming from a more compassionate place, both for themselves and the other person. You start to understand, my partner's reacting this way because they have this history. It's nothing personal about me. It's not that they have, they're broken in some way. It's because they have this history. And as we heal that, then those again, that we start to see improvement in that, and that can really bring couples closer together than they've ever been.
Awesome. Beautiful. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for sharing your wisdom, your knowledge, and I'm excited for this event that we're going to be doing.
Absolutely. Thanks for this idea. This is wonderful, Dante.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Thank you